Hey guys, this is one of my customers brought in a '06 Dodge. What is this? A 30? That's a 2500, 5.9 Cummins in it. I like these pickups. I've tried to buy this one off him a couple times, and he won't sell it to me. But I like this '06. '07's okay too. I really like the '05s and '06s with the 24 valve in them. I mean, this one's got the manual transmission. That really makes it a benefit. I never did care too much for Dodge and their automatic junky transmissions. It seems like anytime you put some power to them, they don't last very long. Then you gotta spend $4,000 or $5,000 to beef them up to make them worth a darn. But what we got going on here? We got dogs are having a good time. Look out, guys. They won't. Of course, it won't do it now. You know, as soon as the mechanic gets a hold of it. It straightens right up. But he called me this morning, and his daughter was driving this pickup up in town. She goes to school up here, and she drove it to town and started acting up on her. And he called me, and I said, just drop it off at my house there. That way you don't have to get a tow bill or something like that. So, it's running fine now, but it's got the codes in there and the check engine light's on. So let's get in here, show you what we've got. So let's go to automatic selection, reading the VIN, taking a while. Yep, that's correct. Diagnosis. Control unit, powertrain, we want to go to the ECM. Read codes. Okay, now the 606 is in there because I was doing some tests on it with the scanner before I made the video, trying to figure out what was going on. As you can hear, it's running fine now. Sounds fine. Fuel injector circuit open on number 3, and then 2146. I've seen this 2146 code before, and what that means, fuel injector group supply voltage circuit open. So what we're going to have to do here, guys, when you get that 2146, most of the time, and it might be an injector, but most of the time, okay, so you're gonna have two sets of plug-ins here coming from the ECM. There's your ECM. So your ECM is what's going to be firing your injectors. There's your ECM down there. Okay. So the wiring harness comes up here, and you got one bank here, one bank of wires here that does 1, 2, and 3, and you got another bank that does 4, 5, and 6. So when they say group 1 supply voltage, they're talking about this group right here. So what we're going to have to do is we'll pull this valve cover off, and then we'll ohm check our wires and our valve cover gasket where this goes to the valve cover gasket, and we'll check our injectors too. So let's get the valve cover off, and we'll ohm check them. 6 10mm headed bolts. Pull those out. Of course, the long ones go on the stepped up part, and the short ones go down on the stepped down part. You'll have to get a short socket and a ratchet. I just take a quarter drive ratchet and a short 10mm socket and take the back ones out. But let's pop this thing off of here. I might need 2 hands for this too. There we go. All right. Okay, so what we're going to do here, guys, you see where your harnesses come in here through your valve cover, and they go into your injectors. What we're going to do is we'll take our wires off. If you're going to ohm check these, you want to ohm check the injector by itself. You don't want to ohm check it with your wires hooked up, because you're going to give yourself a false reading. Okay, so take you a 5/16 or an 8mm and under your injectors, So we know we had a problem with number 3. I'm betting number 3 injector or number 3 wire is going to be our problem. So let me get my ohm meter, and we'll get our 5/16 and take these off, and we'll ohm check all 3. The first 3, since we had group 1 supply voltage, we'll check these first 3 injectors. But remember, we had the code specifically for number 3, so I'm betting number 3 is probably going to be our culprit. You either have high resistance. I've had them with high resistance, and I've had them with open circuits too. Usually with the open circuits, it's pretty easy to figure that out. I mean, you're going to put your meter on there, it's going to say infinite. But usually they read about 2 ohms, 3 ohms. I've had some of them read 10, 12 ohms, and I've changed them and they were fine. So it's more than likely it's the electrical portion of it. I doubt the injector itself is probably fine. It's just the electrical portion of the injector is failed. I'm going to go get my meter. This is the same thing I've run into before. So here's our number 1 injector. Remember, number 3 was the one with our code in it. I should have went and got my alligator clips so I could clip those on there and then run the camera and do everything at one time, but I forgot. So I got 5 ohms. I checked it a minute ago and I had 4. Check number 2. Five ohms. Okay. Here's number 3. It's right at 8 or 9 ohms. We'll call her 9 ohms. So I'm going to go ahead and check 4, 5, and 6 also, but I'm willing to bet that we're going to have to change number 3 injector. That I'm sure that as the heat, as the engine gets warmer, you know, as it gets hotter, as it goes down the road, you know, most of the time when you get more heat, you get more resistance. I'm sure once it gets warmed up and gets hot, it probably gets enough resistance in it, and it'll probably start missing. And what happens on these 24 valves, if you get that 2146 code, the ECM will drop that first 3 injectors because it doesn't want to damage. It thinks that one injector is failing, it doesn't want to damage any of the other ones. It's a fail-safe mode. And what it'll do, it'll drop those 3 cylinders and you'll be running on 3 holes, and it will run like crap, and it'll miss and spit and buck. And so let's get this injector out of here. I might check these wires anyway. I don't think there's going to be anything wrong with them, but I'll check them anyway. But basically, when you check them wires, you'll have to mess around with your ohm meter there and look and see where your pins are. And what I do is I can't remember which ones are which. I'm pretty sure it's just basically the same as the pin arrangement inside here. You know, this first wire is going to be on this first pin. You know, and that's it, and that's the way you check them. So you'll take this and go from end to end, go from this wire to the orange wire, find your orange wire, and then check it from here to here with an ohm meter, and just make sure that you've got good continuity through them. And usually, I mean, you shouldn't see more than an ohm or 2 through that wire. But I'm gonna go ahead, and what we're gonna do next to get this injector out is we've already got our wires loose, of course. We're going to take our exhaust rocker loose, take this 10mm headed bolt out, pull our exhaust rocker off, and then you've got your hold down bolts in there. Take your hold down bolt loose for your injector. You'll have to take your feed tube, take this line here. Boy, they've had a pack rat in here too. I saw that earlier, you know, and I was thinking, oh man, maybe the pack rat chewed a wire up. But I looked at it and I didn't see him. It's actually not a pack rat on this one. This has got to be a mouse. If there was a pack rat, yeah, there'd be wires chewed up. I mean, I've seen them pack rats chew V-belts in two. They're destructive critters, man. But we'll take our feed tube line off. It would be number 1, 2, 3. Would be this one right here. Yeah, be this one right here. So take this 10mm nut off here. It's got this clamp for the line. Take it off, and take your I think they're 19mm. Take these lines loose, and you'll get a 24mm. Now, if you can see that back in there. Oh, I can't get my camera angle right to get you a better view of that. Well, it's right back in here. It's just hard to see it with this camera. But there's a 24mm. Take your feed tube out, and there's a special tool you can screw on the end of the feed tube and then pop it out. But I got the tool too, and I don't use it. I just pop it out with a screwdriver, and away you go. Show you over here. We've got. Let's see here. We've got our feed tube. So the first thing I did is took my 10mm, took my exhaust rocker off, and I always take my valve bridge off too, just so I don't drop it down in the head and forget about it or something. And so take your valve bridge off, and then take your hold down clamp for your injector line on the external side off. Take that off, then take a 19mm, take the two nuts off, and then pop it off of there, and then you'll get your 24mm, and you'll get on this. This is your feed tube right here. And when you put this back in, I'll cover assembly on the next video, but when you put this back in, you want to make sure these two balls are lined up. Twist it. You'll feel it go into the cylinder head. You'll feel it go into the grooves. That way it's feeding the, that's supposed to be in there. If you don't, and you try to tighten that down, I don't even know if you can get the nut started with that in the wrong spot. I've never tried it. I've always just twisted them until that popped in, And then just make sure when you're pulling these out, there's a special tool that screws onto the end of the feed tube that you stick a pair of pliers on and you pull it out. I just pulled this one out by hand. I grabbed it with my fingers. It was a pretty good tug, and I just pulled it out by hand. So next thing we'll do, I'll show you the two hold down bolts down in here. You got a hold down bolt right here. And you got another one right here, back in here behind this. So they're not very tight. I'm trying to remember the torque spec. It's 108 inch-pounds or something like that. When we go back together, you definitely want to retorque your. Feed tube right. And there's a kind of a sequence that I do on these, and we'll cover all that when we go back together. This is just going to be disassembly and checking them, I checked all the rest of these, and all of them are right at 4 or 5 ohms. Actually, I'm misleading you. I keep screwing that up. It's not 4 or 5. It's 0.4. 0.4. This one actually went clear up to 1 ohm when I checked it again. So, that doesn't sound like much, but if you got something that's 0.4 ohms, and this thing's clear up to 0.9, that's over twice as much as it's supposed to be. So think about it that way. Oh, these 24 valves and these Cummins are easy to work on compared to a Power Stroke. Or I get one of these people. I get these quite a bit actually in the last few years, but I get more Power Strokes than anything. But when I get one of these, I go, man, that's money in the bank there, because that's easy money working on one of them compared to a Duramax or a Power Stroke. Now I just got a heel bar here. Once I get my 2 hold down bolts out, and I just get up underneath the hold down, and I just pop her out like that. Oh. There we go. And there it is. There's your 24 valve injector. So we'll get a new injector, get back in this thing. We should be good to go. If you feel the need to, once you put this thing back in, if you get a little fuel that runs down the hole there, just get in there. And even if you don't care about fuel on the bottom side of your hood. I mean, I've had some guys, some old farmers, just spin that thing with the starter and get the fuel out of it. You know, we'd unplug the electric fuel, unplug the lift pump, or take the fuse out or whatever to make sure the lift pump wasn't pumping fuel, and we just spin them over and blow fuel everywhere. But people that don't want fuel all over the bottom of their hood, I'll stick a rag over the top, and then I'll get underneath and get on the crank with a ratchet, and I'll just turn it over by hand and get the fuel out of the cylinder before I put the injector back in. Our new injector for, it's a Bosch Reman injector for this 2006 24 valve Cummins. So we'll get it stuck in there. Make sure you lube this O-ring up a little bit here with some clean engine oil, that way it will slide into the bore a little easier. Make sure your copper washer is on the end. If you want to, you can take a little bit of assembly lube or something, or a little bit of engine oil, if that washer doesn't want to stay on there so it doesn't fall down there and get cocked sideways in the bore. And then slide your injector in, put your hold down bolts in there, and first thing we'll do is torque them down to 44 inch-pounds and get the injector seated, and then we'll back them off and relax them. Then we'll take our feed tube and shove it in, and we'll want to put a new O-ring on that feed tube also. So let me get set up and we'll get ready. So initially torque your hold downs on your injector, torque them to 44 inch-pounds, get the injector seated, and then back them off to where they're just loose. Then put your feed tube in. There it goes. Valve cover's gasket's kind of in the way there a little bit. I'm trying to keep them. If I was doing all 6 of them, I'd probably take it off. But alright. What I did there is I just got the socket head on the actual bolt there, and I just popped the top of the extension with my hand to get the injector to pop down just a little bit there where I could get the bolt started, and then I just turned them in by hand. So now we'll torque them down to 44 inch-pounds. Kind of evenly go around them, tighten that one a little bit, go to the other side. There's 44 on that one. Okay, now we'll back them off. What you want to do is make sure that when you shove that feed tube in there, that injector's not tight and cinched down, that when this goes in there that'll line that port up right. So I got a new O-ring on here. Remember, you got these two balls here, and those will line up in a slot inside the cylinder head. See how I turned it there and it lined up. Okay, get the nut. And you're supposed to torque the nut down to initial torque 11 foot-pounds and then back it off again. But to be honest with you, I just snug it up a little bit. I just snug it up by hand and then gotta do the final torque on it. Oh, 24 millimeter. Let me find my socket. And then I'll go back and torque the injector down to 89 inch-pounds after I snug this feed tube nut up. Focus you damn camera. Yeah, valve cover gasket's a little bit kind of in the way here. Okay, so I got my injector torqued down to 89 inch-pounds. I ohm checked all these injectors when I had it apart, so go ahead and put your wires back on. Very important not to over torque these. These are 11 inch-pounds. To be honest with you, I've changed a lot of these injectors over the years, and I just got to where I take a quarter side ratchet and I just snug them down. But if you want to torque them down, that's fine. I just gotta, common sense. That's a little bitty stud. You don't need to reef them down on there. 11 inch-pounds ain't much. But we got the 5/16 on the torque wrench. We can go ahead and set it up. I don't know if that torque wrench even goes down to 11 inch-pounds, to be honest with you. Then after you torque your injector down to 89 inch-pounds, torque your feed tube to 44 foot-pounds. And then you can put your valve bridge back on your exhaust, and then put your exhaust rocker on, torque it down to 27 foot-pounds. And it's up to you. You can set your valve lash if you want. That's a whole different subject. But if you didn't change anything and you didn't back your adjuster off, then just leave it alone. If you don't feel comfortable doing that. You can't just set valve lash. You have to make sure you're in the right firing order. You want to specify that. If you wanted to set valve lash, you need to, go in firing order and set your valve lash on your intake and exhaust valves. But if you didn't change this lock nut or back anything off, you just took the hold down bolt out, then just make sure it's seated back up in the push tube here. Make sure your push tube is down, sitting up in the cam follower where it's supposed to be. Let's go get the valve bridge and the rocker, and then we'll just show you real quick. Oh, here's where your valve bridge goes against your two exhaust valves right here. Make sure it's on both stems. Okay, so then just like that. You want to make sure that ball's in the end of that push rod. And then this is 27 foot-pounds. Always, I do torque the rockers. I make sure I torque those. I make sure I torque my feed tube nut, and I torque my injector down. Those are the really important things. I mean you can torque these down to 11 if you want, but I just snug them up with a 1/4-inch drive ratchet. Alrighty, well, and then after that, you know, put your fuel injector line back on. I got my wiring harness for my valve cover plug for the first 3 injectors, and then I've got my manifold pressure sensor here. I've got it unplugged to make it to where I can get in here on this feed tube nut. So now we'll finish this thing. Everything on. Injector wiring harness is plugged into the valve cover. All my nuts tight, my exhaust, everything's on. So I like to start them with my valve cover off, just to look at everything, make sure nothing's been forgotten, something's not rattling somewhere. Make sure everything's oiling right before I button her up. So let's go ahead and fire it up. If you do that, make sure that you don't have any bolts or anything laying up here. That way they don't fall down inside there when it's sitting there idling. I got a bar over here. I don't think that's going to wind up in there, but let's get them off there just in case. I'll probably get in here and the battery will be dead or something for sitting here for a day or two. Usually that's what happens. I still got to clear the codes in this thing. Alright, well, clear the codes on it and we should have her whipped. Yeah, I'll clear the codes on it, put the valve cover on it, and we'll drive it. I think we got her whipped. So, thanks for watching.